even going beyond just the very obvious clinical applications. For example, if we could have such technology that would allow us a sort of direct readout of ongoing neural activity, we could start probing our minds in ways that are unprecedented and in more detail than ever before.
Neurotechnologies have a huge potential regarding the improvement of diagnosis and the better monitoring of neurological disorders such as Parkinson's disease, opening new ways to optimize and better personalized treatments.
I see tremendous potential in using technology to make breakthroughs in neurological diseases that have hit a dead end relying on more traditional methods in medicine. And I hope that in the future, neurotechnology will not be defined by the technology itself or the speculative ideas surrounding the technology, but rather for achieving meaningful clinical outcomes and healing those suffering from severe neurological conditions. One of my biggest concerns about neurotechnology is that the conversations surrounding the topic are not grounded in reality. I think there are many people who are interested in this field because the technology itself is exciting.
But another example, more specific to our era, is this questionable vision of augmented human. This raises questions for me as about whether it's ethically acceptable, as it will be fair to recognize that such technologies would undermine free will and autonomy of individuals, as about the fact that it would only benefit a specific niche of people due to the cost of such technologies.
Perhaps one of the biggest concerns with neurotechnology is the fact that we have to protect the right to not be coerced into invasive neurostimulation. And this can be both in very general terms as well as in more subtle ones. For example, we have to protect people from being discriminated if they do not want to use any neurotechnology. And this can happen both at workplace, educational settings, or participation in public or political spaces.
Good morning. My name is Estelle Nacul and I'm a postdoctoral researcher in neuroscience here at Campus Biotech. Every day I am having discussions with my peers, PhD students and young postdocs about the great potential of our work. And this is truly exciting, but it also raises many questions about the impact of neurotechnologies, things we're working on ourselves, and things we're seeing coming out of other labs all around the world. The voices we're hearing from various communities, either students, researchers, patients, users, are important in building a future in which we can really all benefit from science. But how can we collect these voices? How can we make them contribute to decision-making for the future of neurotechnology, for our collective future? What you just saw was a small experiment, a video experiment, to engage different communities, here PhD students, to express their dreams and thoughts about the future of neurotechnology. We need the voices and the specific perspective of very different and various communities to be heard as decision makers from governments, research or industry are enabling the development of neurotechnology. I wish you a very good session. Thank you.
Thank you, Estelle. I hope you hear me. Yes. So, as you've heard on and on the last 36 hours, we start with the science, and we wanted to start with the science once again, actually from the science from the building even, and the film stacker experiment, which we just did for us, was a way to start looking at how can we catch these actual different perspectives from around the world. And if we want to be inclusive and global and geographically spread, we need to find the right tools to do that. And that's part of what GESDA has been also experimenting with in the last months. So today we're going to hold your hand through what we've been doing for the last 18 months around the field of neurotechnology. It was 2 years ago, basically, a dot on the radar. That's how it started. Late 2020, the drop dropped. And we started curating and deciding how we were going to take this conversation forward, very much like what you heard yesterday on a number of topics from synthetic biology or organoids, thinking, oh my gosh, we need to have this conversation. So on this topic we did, and we brought in a task force led by co-chairs, and we've curated this discussion. And what we want today is to update, to show you how we've had these conversations, share with you where we are in these conversations, and it's not at the level of maturity of the two that we've been highlighting this week, of the Open Quantum Institute or on the Science Diplomacy curriculum, but we're not very far behind, and we still need a few steps ahead before we can actually have our coming out moment the same way, let's say. But, and that is actually a part of this summit, will help us get to that stage and bring the right voices in and continue shaping the final design of this proposal. So I think for this next step, I'm going to invite to the stage my colleagues, which is almost, I would call them our NeuroTech family today here at GESDA. So please, Jörg, Olaf, and Lydia, you have your seats assigned. So Olaf Blanke, you have a long title, Professor of Neuroscience, actually works in the building next door. Estelle works with Olaf. Works in the Bertarelli Chair in Cognitive, sorry, I still have to read this, Neuroprosthetic Director of Laboratory in Cognitive Neuroscience. For me, it's Olaf, it's a lot easier. But he's also a professor in neurology at the Department of Neurology at the University Hospital of Geneva. So he's the scientist at the table. Then we have Lydia Brito, Regional Director of UNESCO in Africa, the southern part of Africa, who actually moved recently from South America region, from Montevideo, and Jörg Glauber, our uber diplomat, Swiss ambassador, permanent representative of Switzerland at the United Nations here in Geneva and other organizations. I'd also like to invite to the stage Stephanie and Olivier. Stephanie is a staff attorney at US, a Washington-based firm called Precise Strategy, and also counsel of Neuro Rights Foundation. And Olivier has multiple hats. We'll explore a bit of these. Co-founder of a tech company called Inclusive Brains and professor also at Aix-Marseille University. So you can claim a couple of these hats. So we'll start, as I said, with the science and walk you through the discussions, how we've arrived where we are, and then I'll start with Olaf. You have been the dot on the radar. You are the dot on the radar. What is it that our audience should know about where technology is today, and what is it that, how did we start this conversation in our field here?
Yeah, thanks, Dara. Yes, so neuroscientists have used technology, I think, forever. I mean, we are obliged to do so. So what is really special about this moment of neurotech today? And I think one of the key factors that led to this is really an explosion of new methods, devices in engineering and in computer science, AI. We've heard it several times also yesterday, that have massively arrived in the domain, in the arena of neurosciences, not just neurosciences, but also medical applications. So these fields used to be sort of in silos, you could say. Engineering here, computer science here, medicine there, neuroscience yet somewhere else. But now neurotech, and I think there's really an integrated field, meaning that within those four domains, you have to very directly work together on a daily basis. And these are the new advances that we're seeing, and we do need them because we want to understand the brain, or at least we want to improve understanding of the brain, and we do need a lot of new neuro-based, neurotech-based therapies for many of the devastating neurological and psychiatric diseases for which we simply don't have any cures. And in cases like Alzheimer's disease, not even a therapy to offer to millions of patients already in Europe and worldwide. Let me give you maybe an example about one particular case to illustrate how neurotech already today has made an advancement, a major advancement. This is a case of Parkinson's disease that I think I mentioned last year at the summit as well. So there is a Parkinson's disease, again, 1 million patients in Europe, 5 million worldwide are affected, particularly motor disorders, so slowness of movement, shaking, and also cognitive decline. But a neurotech-based therapy in that case an invasive therapy from the clinic, needs a brain operation, needs a neurosurgeon to implant electrodes, specific electrodes designed by engineers and targeting a particular region deep in the brain that has been elucidated by neuroscientists, and then stimulation of specific currents can lead to a treatment. It can alleviate the shaking, can make and allow patients to move again and speak. So this is today. So what is going to happen in 5 years? And I believe that's what is shown on the slide up there. There's something called closed-loop systems that will appear much more powerfully in the next couple of years, which means I don't only have an electrode that is implanted somewhere in the brain, I have another sensor, another set of electrodes somewhere else in the brain, and I could detect pathological activity. And once I detect this, the brain stimulation, the specific frequency can be changed. And once this pathological brain activity related to Parkinson's disease will disappear, then I can change again the current, and this is this loop. It's a closed loop system. You detect brain activity, you change the stimulation, and you do this obviously not just depending on pathological activity, but also based on what you're doing, whether you're sleeping, you're sitting in the audience, you're speaking. All these different states are massively different in the brain, and these closed loop systems will play a major role, not just for Parkinson's disease, but also for many other diseases. What will happen in the 10 to 25 years, think about not just a handful of electrodes implanted and decoding, but thousands of electrodes. This is not science fiction. This is a talk I've heard last Friday where somebody is developing systems, implanting even in a mouse brain up to 1,000 electrodes decoding signals. So this will come in humans within the next 10 years, within the field of Parkinson's disease, and then we do need AI, and these amounts of data are simply incredible, and you have to do this not decode this 10 days later, you have to do this on the spot, in real time, and feeding this back to the stimulation current. So you get an idea what kind of engineering and computer science is necessary to make these novel therapies necessary. And then to project further, in 25 years, I've talked only about movement. Can we apply this to memory? Can we apply this to treat and improve the condition of Alzheimer's disease, for example? Brings me to 2 more points before I'm closing, that there are many ethical concerns, many legal aspects we should think about. Who has access to these technologies? Let's say we develop something for Alzheimer's disease and we have this technology in 10 years. Who will have access to this? Somebody with severe Alzheimer's, somebody with mild Alzheimer's? How do we titrate between the two? How do we make a decision? Where do we draw this line within countries, across the globe? A very important aspect that we've discussed a lot. And another option will be, well, if this is a successful therapy, if we can improve memory in a patient with mild Alzheimer's disease, well, maybe that patient will have better memory performance than a healthy age-matched individual from the normal population. So do we exclude healthy individuals from these NeuroTech enhancements? Of course, I think we cannot by definition, but what are the rules? What is in place to really help us take decisions and be forward-looking and anticipating? I think these are things that are currently completely missing in academia for sure, but in these different fields. And I think we need to reach out to people like on this audience. A last comment, and I know I've gone a bit over time. I've only told you at least half the story. I've talked about the medical field where neurotechnologies are very regulated, but there is the other half of neurotechnology, which is non-invasive, operating outside the medical field. This is consumer technology, likely or likewise decoding, stimulating the brain and developing closed-loop systems. This is completely unregulated. Anybody of us could buy this in a store, even online, if you want. And so you get an idea that this is a very slippery slope. These technologies, non-invasive, are further away from some of these therapies that are, and changes that I've mentioned to you. But again, we're dealing not with a small sample of individuals in the clinic. We're dealing literally with everyone, including children. And I think I stop here.
Thank you. Actually, the problem is that we started late, so the clock doesn't mean anything to me anymore. Caroline, that's just a hint. Thank you, because that actually is where we started, like you did yesterday. We started with that, and then we asked Olaf to become the co-chair of this task force. We asked Lydia to become the diplomacy co-chair. I think, Jörg, you get an honorary title for diplomacy co-chair as well. And so that's what our colleagues there were given. And of course, then it's, oh my gosh, did I understand it right? And actually, this was only one piece of it. There's a lot more of the technologies that are fascinating and that we actually need to be able to promote. So Lydia, you in your role, you've been a science policy expert for government. You actually then went to UNESCO, worked on all the governance questions. UNESCO's worked very strongly on what should we do around governance to make every users and comfortable around AI. Now, how do those lessons from AI you brought in that perspective, tell us how that then resonates in this story?
Thank you very much, Daria, and again, a pleasure to be physically in the summit this year. And I think what we have seen is that emerging technologies, if you don't have a good conversation between science, diplomacy, policymakers, what happens is the governance mechanisms set almost naturally, and then it's very hard to change. I mean, how many decades we have been involved in thinking on internet governance to make it more open, more participatory, and etc. So that's the first issue that we have been discussing also in the task force. We know where the science is going, but where are we developing enough knowledge about governance systems that allow us to make sure that indeed the technologies will benefit to the ones who need most and not the other way around. And we just had a session on the right to participate in science and the right to benefit from the scientific solutions. And it's clear that we have a lot to do. And one of the things that we fight quite a lot in UNESCO, and I see Marga there, we are always discussing this, the importance to have the interface, not only between science and policy, but between science, policy, and society. We always say the S in UNESCO is for science and is for society. Because if you don't have a bottom-up approach, if you are not able to have a generation that understands where this technology comes from and the implications of this, then it's very hard to discuss human rights. It's very hard to see the ethical constraints. And we were discussing this morning, self-validation in the scientific world is not enough anymore. Because these are, in fact, we see the impacts and we are predicting the impacts are really life-altering, are really society-altering in a very deep way. So what UNESCO is doing, it's first of all, we have been working with the issues related to bioethics, with the declaration of bioethics and human rights, but also the 2017 on science and scientific research, that where the question of freedom of research is there, but associated also with a common responsibility of what science and technology is bringing. And most recently, two very important documents. One is the Open Science Recommendation that, again, it's opening this idea that science is a common good and participating in science is a human right. And we need to make that very clear. It's not only about sharing data, it's about making sure that you have the critical mass to have research in your countries, in your regions, sharing infrastructure, and so on and so on. Citizen science, how can we involve the citizens in our co-production, co-design and co-production of scientific knowledge? The other one that is quite important, and you mentioned that, is artificial intelligence and the ethical issues related to artificial intelligence, because we know, again, that these technologies are already with us in our everyday life. Do we know that? Do we know how they work? Do we know why they benefit us and why they don't benefit us? We don't understand the technologies behind that. And I would say that the report of the International Bioethics Committee of UNESCO on ethical issues of neurotechnology is precisely saying this. These technologies, we do need indeed to make sure that society is part of the dialogue, and society at large. The definition of society should not just be a general thing, oh, we are here, so we are society, clearly. but we are not enough. So we do need to address specific groups, and of course science diplomacy will have to play a huge role on bringing all of us together with a strong interface.
Thank you, Lydia. Now your perspective, Jörg, as you chaired this UN working group that started in 2019, successfully, I hear, that really looked at the potential risks and threats from the communication technologies. We're talking potential risks and threats, and we at GESDA don't like to use these words. The anticipation allows us to transform this reflection into opportunities. So you come in with that particular experience. What's the landscape on your end, and also how you arrived at the table of this discussion really from the other end? So help us and help our colleagues here understand the path that we've taken.
Yeah,
and where we are today.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. I think what the path I took was coming to this as an ignorant, really, and then in the conversations with the scientists, starting to realize, ooh, something's going on. And it was a bit of a roller coaster of fears and hopes, I say. You probably had the same reaction to the presentations you saw an hour earlier. Yes, please enhance my memory. I really need that. But oh no, don't read it. Don't read my mind too much. So it's about benefits, potential benefits, and about potential risks. Now, when it comes to regulating, or after identifying the need for regulation, how do we get to regulation? By diplomats on an international level or by lawmakers on a national level. And there, I think understanding some of the issues is key. I always, when I had the chance to participate or even facilitate, chair over such negotiations, my first approach is always try to bring the people, the diplomats in the room together and have a discussion on the issue first. So you can avoid the discussion going completely ideological. You know, I say this with all due respect to my fellow diplomats, but we tend to, if we don't understand the issue, that doesn't stop us from negotiating. We then just negotiate process, and we have like positions we always have towards this and that. But when you bring the people together and you make them not becoming experts, but at least as understand a little bit more about the issues, then you are more likely to come to a conclusion, to a positive outcome, and have something that is really useful in the end. Now, I think with neuroscience, as complicated this still is, especially for people who come from my end, as you said, Daria, I think the advantage is it's already pretty tangible. You listen, you read these reports, you listen to the scientists, what's possible, and whoa, this is serious. At the same time, we still have to acknowledge that at this point, only few governments have the capacity, the time, the resources to really look into this. So this is, I think, where GESDA comes in. We need to bring this information to the table of the diplomats. Something's happening, UNESCO is looking into it, Council of Europe is looking into it, OECD is looking into it. Here in Geneva, we have Greece started an initiative recently about the impact of neuroscience, neurotechnology on human rights. Switzerland is participating in that, but it's bits of pieces, it's fragmented. That's not a bad thing, that it takes time to pick this up, but the risk of fragmented looking at this and fragmented regulation is that you hamper implementation. If you don't have a comprehensive norms, comprehensive regulation, you will also make implementation much harder. So we should try to find a forum with people who have a basic understanding, who then are able to come up with comprehensive norms to promote potential benefits and contain potential risks. And again, this is, I think, the task of GESDA, bringing the information to the diplomats and then allow the diplomats or the national lawmakers to address these issues.
Super, thanks a lot. And there are indeed many initiatives, and it's quite impressive to see so many actors already involved in it, but quite fragmented. So I want to turn over to our to our two colleagues here on the right, bringing in a very different perspective, also part of the task force, and it's been actually interesting to figure out as we go along which voices do we need to bring in and who's missing. And of course, we also don't want to become 100 people at the table discussing and making the process of building something concrete more difficult. But Stephanie, you came to us quite fast because one of the hats that you carry is having worked on the Neuro Rights Foundation, which did a big work from the academic side in the US. We won't go into the details of that, but as a human rights lawyer working in that space, you are, and your firm are very active in the US on actually trying to implement and deal with these issues of neuroscience and human rights. Share with us a bit where you are with this.
Sure. So thank you for having me here today. I just wanted to add quickly to my title that I'm an international human rights lawyer. And this is not just to give a disclaimer, and I know that that's what lawyers give, but this is to characterize that our work is done through a human rights lens. That is, with the goal of advancing and protecting international human rights as codified in the UN International Human Rights Treaties, which make up a body of law. And so when we talk about neurotechnology, or methods to read and record brain activity, we are always thinking at the Neuro Rights Foundation about how this technology advances human rights, or whether its misuse and abuse by states and private actors needs to be regulated to prevent human rights violations. And so we engage governments in two ways. First, at the global level, where, as Daria mentioned, we've written a report applying international human rights law to neurotechnology to analyze where there might be human rights protection gaps that the United Nations can act to fill. And in that, we've proposed a number of ways that existing international human rights law can be further interpreted to account for neurotechnology and the unique ways it affects human dignity, or can. But at the national level, we are engaged with a consumer advocacy publication to review what is now widely available consumer neurotechnology to assess for the first time its civil and human rights implications. Within the medical context, when neurotechnology is used in the doctor's office or in other sensitive settings, countries tend to have national laws regulating the data that's collected by this technology. So for instance, your brain scan for a medical purpose is likely protected under the laws of a country. But when you buy a consumer device, that may not be the case. And when you buy that device, the data that is stored from it can be sold to third parties. It may not be fully de-identified by the companies that collect it. And so a new host of civil liberties and human rights concerns arise from the use and pervasiveness of the consumer tech. And so our hope is that by collaborating with this consumer advocacy publication, as well as with relevant state and federal actors in the United States, we can help create regulations that protect consumers as they participate in the market for these consumer neurotechnology devices, which are becoming more and more pervasive. One need only look to the headlines to understand both the potential positive impacts of these technologies as well as the potential negative ramifications. On one hand, they're helping patients who are nonverbal communicators to communicate for the first time with family and friends. And that's obviously a right that we would want to protect under international human rights law and under domestic regulations. But at the same time, as Olaf mentioned, these non-invasive technologies, which do not require surgery to implant and which can just be worn like a headband or a hat, there are already concerns about neurosurveillance and opportunities for discrimination abroad. There were a number of articles about the use of this technology, unfortunately exported by a United States-based company to China, where these devices were used to monitor children's attention levels in Chinese classrooms. Now, the accuracy of this technology is still hotly contested, right? But the concern and the precedent is certainly there. The idea that states and private actors could misuse and abuse this technology non-consensually for nefarious ends. And so for that reason, we're hoping that in our consumer advocacy collaboration, we will rank for the first time the civil liberties and human rights implications of these devices and how the privacy agreement, the terms of use, and the legally binding documentation should reflect protections for all of those rights.
Thank you. So a lot going on, a lot being done, a lot of people thinking about it, so that's wonderful. US, so that gives us a landscape of what's going on there. Very helpful. Now, we're talking about technology, so technology is developed also in the lab, but it's actually developed by industry. And so industry is a key player in our discussions, yet at this stage in our discussions, it wasn't the key player to get us on the science diplomacy level aligned. We first needed to actually figure out what are we talking about. and Olivier, you joined us to really bring in that perspective. And why is this a key? Why would industry be interested in discussing this in this science diplomacy? And what role has industry? You have multiple hats. That's why I think it's interesting to get you to tell us from also that understanding.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm lucky enough to have worked in neuroscience as an academic in a non-governmental organization, the World Economic Forum, for the Prime Minister of France. So as a policymaker, I was involved in as France being the first country ever to change its laws to include a part on neuroscience, and now I'm in the private sector. It's very interesting when you think about it. But before I speak, if you would allow, I'm going to enhance myself with technology. And it's very interesting also to consider that I have the luxury to enhance myself. For me, not being able to see clearly is not a matter of life and death. But there are a couple of kids in countries where they could step on a snake or on a scorpion, where seeing what is happening is a matter of life and death. Unfortunately, they don't have access to the technology the way I have. Should we stop developing this technology because there is an unequal distribution? That's the first question. And it's a very important moral dilemma. The second point I would like to raise is there wouldn't be this technology without the industry. First, without the researchers, but then transferring technology to society, not just for business purposes, but for society and its good, it's crucial. But what is as important as the commerce part, the business part, is the regulation part. The industry wants stringent regulation, because if there is regulation that is developed and applied by people who know what they are talking about, then it will remove from the business all, pardon my French, all the clowns, all the people who pretend they're doing magic. It's not science fiction, it's just science in action that we're talking about. The problem being that who is talking about neuroscience? Who is deciding what is happening? Would you trust someone to talk about heart surgery if they never heard about biology? I don't know. Would you give them the keys to regulation? What I hear a lot, and GESDA is an exception, sadly, is people talking about neurotechnology and neuroscience at the policy level, at the regulation level, and sometimes at the scientific level without involving the industry. For better or worse, industry is far ahead when it comes to what can be done with technology. I've sat on committees where people were talking about soon or in the near future, we'll be able to control things with our minds. I was the president of a company that made a quadriplegic person drive a Formula One car, a race car on a real track, a real car on a racetrack, only with a technology that cost less than 500 euros. It was already happening. I heard this morning someone say, one day AI is going to decrypt our emotions when we speak. Man, that's been the case for 7 years in the industry. And that is my concern, is this huge gap between the knowledge of people who are asked, and I am an academic. I am one of these people who was brought in by the French government. And when I was brought in 2010, I had no clue what was happening in the industry. Today I'm on the other side, or I have both feet. And I think the industry wants to be part of this, not just to block regulation, but to support it. Again, as the co-founder of a company that is creating brain-computer interfaces for disabled people to have access to work, to stop being excluded, yes, it's so unfair. Our technology will first benefit people from my country and from the Western countries, because this is where we're located. But hopefully, thanks to regulation, but also thanks to the private sector and its power to spread and to deploy, the technology will be available to people. Now, there is also a problem of what credit we give science in all of this. Science is key. And the biggest enemy to science is people claiming that something is scientific and is not. The United Nations, the UNESCO, GESDA, some of the organizations involved are using surveys. Surveys are a denial of science. There is 40 years of literature, scientific literature, saying that one cannot rely on surveys. Yet surveys are the number one source of information for regulation, for governments, and for policy making. Why? Because the people who do the science and have shown that surveys are unreliable are not involved in the conversations. And surveys are convenient, and because we have no other way to think we decrypt people's minds. So my ask here is more people from science, hardcore science, that publish, and more people from the industry that have bridged this gap between what happens in labs, in these ivory towers that are labs, and the real demands of society. Not all the companies are going to develop neurotechnologies that are going to help society. Hey, if we go back to my initial point, there are a bunch of companies that use this optical technology in order to create a technology that helps snipers kill people. Should we stop manufacturing glasses because of those people? No. Should we regulate so that these people are under control? Absolutely.
Tout un programme, as we say in French. Thank you, Olivier. Thank you, all of you. So, what do we do from here? So this is how we start our conversations in the task force, is we bring these different voices, and we have the different pieces of the puzzle, and then we try to build something with it, try to build a solution, try to design a solution. What is a solution? Again, it's to open the path for science to benefit all. So how can we actually make sure neurotechnologies, and we're not talking about glasses because that's not anticipating anymore, but those that we see coming up in the future where we can still act, how can we make sure we do it right for the next step? So it's a vast agenda. We need to narrow down, and we need to figure out, decomplexify, and start from the beginning. So where we can say we have to understand the technology to at least a certain extent. Perhaps we need to understand, perhaps more than understanding the technology or the science, we need to understand the impact of the science and technology. And then we have to know what's actually being done already about it today, and we need to make sure we bring in the right actors, we need to bring in the organizations that are in there. And so a solution to this, thinking Jörg, Lydia, and Olaf, a successful solution in the end, what should it do? What should it bring? What's the success for you?
Yes, let me start by saying that also in all the discussions, I think the solution should look, or there's a tendency of us to look at risks associated. But a risk can be like that NeuroTech is moving too fast and there's inequality, but this inequality could also be because we're not pushing enough the NeuroTech agenda and we're missing that critical research is performed to move forward, again, in those clinical applications and the other applications. So for me as a scientist, I think we need a lot more research on those topics, and we need to make that possible at all possible levels in an integrated fashion, not losing that great potential that we have, and to achieve this in 5, 10, or more years. On the other side, of course, discussions, I think, as we have discussed several times, with industry, with governments, with international organizations, but to do this now and to really shape what is happening. From a scientist's point of view, I think this is something we never do. Right? In that sense, we're also completely naive, but coming from the opposite perspective. But there needs to be a trust. This will take time to develop. and it leads to new collaborations. Also, maybe experiments need to be done at those critical boundaries between what is allowed, not allowed, what is a hijacking of brain activity. Maybe we actually need to do research on those topics to get to those real hard data, and of course, under ethical commission allowances and so on. But I think GESDA, among the many other things, can also make fantastic contributions to really say what is important already now and will get more important in time, and what kind of critical experiments do we need to do to allow further advances in that direction.
So success is about making sure science, we understand which science and really bring all the attention on the right science as well. Lydia, in 2 words, what do we need to make sure we bring to the table in our solution?
No, I would say that, again, the involvement of society and really strengthen this dialogue between science, policymakers, society, including the business community. But if you don't have the dialogue, if you don't really understand where the technology comes from, if you don't understand the science, you just see the impacts. It's going to be very hard to regulate in a good way something that can bring benefits, but that can also create risks to human societies. So for me, success will be this wonderful dialogue in involvement that we know as human societies where we are going and why and how we are doing it, and not really having these black boxes controlled somewhere, and we are just into the midst of changing without really knowing why it's happening, how it's happening. So understanding the science in terms of appropriation of a culture of science in societies is what we need. I mean, the level of scientific development, not only in neuroscience and NeuroTech, everywhere, is so huge that if you don't have knowledge societies, you don't have a culture of science in societies, science can be a problem for us.
So a lot of work to do there. Okay, and Jörg, success?
Yeah, you heard trust. I think it's a key word for me. You know, I think we need to bring the science, the knowledge out of science to the table of the diplomats, because everybody has so much information that we're not going to go there. So we need to find a way to bring it there. In my experience, it's not that much that the UN or other bodies rely so much on surveys instead of science. But the fact is, of course, once you go into regulation on a national or international level, you enter politics. And so it's becoming a challenge to bring the real information, the real data. But, you know, there's also not just science. You know, when I, for instance, remember last year, the last 2 years, who called themselves scientists and told us about COVID, helped me identify which one I can trust or not. And I think there as well, GESDA could have a job, you know, bring certified, trustworthy scientific information to the table of the diplomats, so they know, okay, this is real, this is true, this is a basis for us to work on, to negotiate, to legislate, to find norms.
Thank you. So then the question for us, well, how do we get there? And so one of the things we collectively thought in the task force is that we need to find a tool or a way to actually be able to make it easy for the policymaker or any decision maker who will want to decide where to go and how to make sure these technologies get their full potential. How do we actually, what can we make available for them? And our colleague, unfortunately, Ricardo Chavarriaga, was kind enough not to come because he's got COVID, but he is listening to us. So thank you, Ricardo, for all the work you've done helping us shape the tool that we believe together is a first piece to actually answer this need. But almost as good as Ricardo, I have my colleague Gérard Escher from GESDA, who's been, please join me on stage, who's been shaping this with us. And the lucky side is that Gérard is also a neuroscientist, so it makes things a lot easier when we're trying to think on how to do things. So Gérard, walk us through this thing that we've sort of tried to conceive together. Here it is. And this thing that we believe could be at least a first piece to help bring us all together on this. No, that's the...
Oh, it's not the right person. I hope you can cope. Oh, it's not the, so you don't have the right person. I hope you can cope. And it's 1 year of work of a task force, of a brilliant task force, condensed in one slide. So I hope we manage.
Let's start with this one, because this is actually a way to put, the next one is the one you can play with. This one is the one that shows the actual complexity of the content we have in there.
So that's the resume of the discussion until now. And now, so we have this challenge to have the science, and to have the science live and good and updated, and to understand the impacts on society, on ourselves, and to know the regulatory map, nationally, internationally, hard law, soft law. To bring all this together and to still keep the enthusiasm for neurotechnology, there is something to do now so that we can have the best benefits in the future, from now on to the future. So first, we start with the science. That's the GESDA brand. We start with neurotechnology. And we had one example presented by Olaf. Of course, there is a whole ontology categorization of neurotechnologies, invasive, non-invasive, and so forth. And let's take the closed loop example presented before. And then we have on the other side the impacts. The impacts for us, also following Stephanie and the NeuroRights Foundation, are given in the domain of human rights. So the impacts we should look at is dignity, freedom, equality, solidarity, citizens' rights, justice, might be others. And then we look at legal frameworks. Of course, the universal frameworks, a Declaration of Human Rights, then regional charters, international charters, then national constitutions, charters of the EU, of Africa, and also soft law, so recommendations of the OECD for responsible innovation in neurotechnology could be added. So this is just a small sample. And then we have to make sense of these 3 dimensions, and we make an analysis of regulations looking at gaps, but not just at gaps, also at opportunities to push, as Olaf said before, to push better research, better implementation, better equity or equality. And so all this together, the neurotechnology in question, the impact and the legal frameworks coalesce to an understanding, to an analysis, which leads to calls for action. It's very important. It's not just an analysis, it's calls for action. And we understand from the input that these actions involve a discussion, a space where real scientists and real diplomats, but also the private sector and the society as a whole can have a word. So that's our mapping. That is the matrix, the mother matrix that the task force has put together for the NeuroTech company.
Yeah, we're not honoring the amount of brain work put in there, but but it's actually, the first slide was interesting because you actually see the embryo of a massive Excel document, which ultimately needs to... So why did we do that? Because all these questions, came on and on, meeting after meeting, say, I still don't get it, I still don't know what I'm supposed to do, I need to know, I need to... We're calling this the NeuroTech Compass because we want to help navigate this, I'd say, this sea of complexity. It's not just what's complex about the science and its impacts, but it's also on how you're going to figure out what to do about it. And it's actually this matrix, you can imagine a database. We're testing it. We're not at the end of believing this is the right tool, but it seems that that's what's missing for Jürg and his colleagues, for the governments to come in and say, okay, I get it, now I feel I've got what I need to be able to do something about these developments that I see coming up on my future. And that allows then to come in from a country's perspective, from a technical perspective, from a governance perspective, and then actually see perhaps what's not being done, with a risk also of not anticipating. If you're not anticipating and putting in place what's necessary to help your technology develop, we will not be able to have the glasses for a country that actually wants to be able to have the glasses. Your example with China was also a good example. China has decided to develop a specific technology. I think France decided, no, that doesn't sound good.
It's interesting that the strength of a compass as a unique tool is that it's not just about informing people. Information is necessary but not sufficient. If information was sufficient, no physician would be smoking, because they have information that is bad. Physicians smoke. 2 words that show you that information is not enough. Second, you also need people from different angles, perspectives, different stakeholders to make decisions, or a set of decisions, thanks to a tool. If you just ask society, you might end up with things that some of us wouldn't want. I come from a country where death penalty was abolished against the people. The great majority of people did not want to abolish it. There are so many examples. Here we got the framework and the methodology with the knowledge.
And we got 2 other speakers waiting, so I'll just jump in to say that this is, for us, in a way, this is the beginning of the next phase, because we actually need to test it, prototype it, but that is actually answering the need that the different people at the table felt there was a missing piece before we could go further. The further bit we'll get into a second. Thank you, Gérard, for giving us the nutshell summary, and Olivier, the nutshell summary of the compass. I'd say the NeuroTech compass actually needs to involve all these communities. You've got that. So this is when we're trying to now design and to give you the elevator pitch like we did yesterday on the Open Quantum Institute or the Science Diplomacy Curriculum. It's a tool for policymakers, it's a tool for decision makers, it doesn't necessarily need to be only for governments, on actually how to first get the information. Oops, looks funny. We need to be able to make sure you have the information on what's happening in the technology. We need to make sure you understand the impact that these technologies are having. And we need to actually bring you the consolidated, correlated information on how these technologies, impact, and governance actually work together, so you can actually then decide what to do with it. But that's not necessarily sufficient. We believe that there's still a piece missing here, a piece about triggering, making policymakers interested in coming and using that. It's fine to have a tool, it's fine to have brought all these brilliant ideas together, but we're not yet at the next phase of people coming and knocking at our door saying, ooh, I want to use this thing. So we still have a bit to go, and we'll go through that briefly later. But in this effort of actually engaging government and Jürg's colleagues, we've started with a NeuroTech compass, like we did brilliantly on the Open Quantum Institute, hosting actually Jürg's strategy, hosting these diplomatic dinners on these really sexy topics. Quantum diplomatic dinner, you can imagine. Your colleagues came originally thinking, sounds cool, I'll come. And then they got trapped. Now we had our first neurotechnology diplomatic dinner, and I'd like to call upon Mehraf, our ambassador, to the United Nations and other organizations from Israel. You were at our first dinner. Tell us how that was, and perhaps why that was important to you, and why will you come to the next dinner? Should work.
Thank you very much, Daria. And
could you stand up?
Sure. Thank you very much, Daria and GESDA. And we certainly came, first of all, for Jorg's food, but the conversation was extremely important. And I wanted to thank Jorg and GESDA for hosting it, because it gave us, the diplomats, that we run on so many issues daily, but we don't have the opportunity actually to stop and think about what will happen 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and certainly not about the implications of technology. And as Jorg said also, sometimes we touch it in different aspects. We just passed a resolution, which Israel also supported, on neurotechnology and human rights, but it's in silos, and it's not in a holistic way. So first of all, really to thank GESDA that is making us, it's very much appreciated, the fact that we can interact with your scientists and experts and really understand better the issues for us, and through us, back to our governments as well. I must say that in my interactions in the different organizations in the UN, sometimes technology is looked at threats and risks. And while we come from Israel, we look at it as opportunities and challenges. And I think really, I would like to emphasize this framing, because technology is good. But, of course, it needs to be regulated, it needs to be thought of, we need to see the implication and where it's going through, the human rights implications, dignity, many other aspects. But I think that for us, it's very important and to look at it as an opportunity and challenges, and really, and how do we bring the different actors together? And in that, I think that GESDA is doing a very good job in bringing, also the scientist community, the diplomats, and through us, the policymakers, of course, the academia, the civil society, and my country is involved in many technologies, neurotechnology, AI, but it's important for us also to see how we push forward the governmental part of it, not only the private companies, the startups, the research is really how do we stop and actually make sure that all the issues that have been raised during the dinner and today and in all the forums that here we are have the opportunity to listen to GESDA, how we actually stop and think where is the government role, where is the civil society role, what needs to be regulated, what shouldn't be regulated, what actually should go, with no government intervention. So in this, I wanted to thank Daria very much and for hosting it. It really makes us stop. I know I speak on behalf of many other colleagues from different regions. That's what's also very good. Different. It's not. It can be from Africa, from Asia, from Latin America, certainly, and of course from Europe. So different countries and different perspectives, and how do we take it forward from here? So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mira, for that feedback. I think one of the things Jorgo has put forward is we need to innovate in diplomacy as well. And I think what you're doing through these efforts, and that's a luxury of Geneva. I mean, you are here, 15 minutes, you're at Jörg's place for dinner, we can do this. And I think that's really something we have the chance to curate, this innovation in diplomacy in Geneva. Now, I want to turn to the screen to Ayeka, who's joining us. Thank you so much from New York at very, very, very early in the morning. Thank you very much. So the voice of the United Nations here is obviously the one that's I wouldn't say missing, because you've been doing this for quite a while now. You come from you're director of the strategic and planning division at the Office of the United Nations Secretary General, and you've now just had your second roundtable specifically on the topic of neurotechnology. And tell us how that's been. How did that arrive on the UN's Secretary General's table? And where are you with that, and how this discussion is relevant to you? Thank you, Ayeka.
Great. Well, thank you, Daria. And it's great to see Jorg. We miss him in New York. So, yeah, listen, we've been in exploration mode as well. And well, I think it's a very well-known fact that the Secretary General was trained as electrical engineer before his political career. So he has a deep interest in science. And in March 2021, the Secretary General had a conversation with a scientist on neurotechnology and immediately realized its potential impact on society and asked us to convene informally stakeholders to look at both human rights impacts of this technology, but also the broader governance implications. And here, I would like to underscore that we fully agree with the Israeli ambassador's framing of opportunities and challenges. So, as you said, we have since organized 2 expert roundtables, including experts from within the UN system, such as UNESCO, Office of High Commissioner for Human Rights, Global Pulse, external experts, including those from civil society and academia, Stephanie and her colleagues, and some private sector actors as well. And also during this time, in between the roundtables, we have also extensively reviewed a mapping of existing human rights treaties and conducted a survey of private actors to analyze the implications of future neurotechnology scenarios. And here, I can't overemphasize the urgency for action. An interesting outcome from the survey was that most experts predicted that these technologies will be gaining widespread significance as early as 3 years from now. And as noted, NeuroTech consumer products are already available. In terms of our second roundtable, there was general expert consensus that we should build on existing human rights treaties, which, while generally ill-equipped to specifically protect neural rights as such, do contain general comments and recommendations that are broad enough to encompass neurotechnologies. And given the current geopolitical environment, new rights treaties and framework would not be the optimal route to address neuro risks. Rather, specific rights challenges associated with neurotechnologies need to be regularly reviewed, enumerated, and stakeholder groups across just need to develop soft and hard law to ensure that practitioners understood and applied human rights due diligence. Now, just really focusing on our second roundtable, the experts also just building on the rights research and the private sector survey feedback, identify the following areas of priority. 1, mental integrity, where an individual can maintain control of their own mental states. 2, mental privacy, where an individual is protected against the unconsented intrusion by third parties into their mental information. And 3, mental freedom, where neurotechnology cannot be used to manipulate thought or behavior. There was also substantive discussion on the need to align international standards on brain data collection and storage, especially by private actors who have begun operations in this space, mostly in Europe and Americas. So we can't be complacent given that there are no governance frameworks in the pipeline, notwithstanding the 2019 OECD Council's recommendations for responsible innovation in neurotechnology. Which brings us to the importance of discussions like this one today, where we are bringing together policymakers, experts, consumers, and industry to align on the way forward. And we fully agree on a need for dialogue and bringing all the stakeholders together to collaborate on solution pathways to neurotechnology challenges. This is a topic that is gaining momentum among governments and policymakers. In fact, at the end of September, the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva called for a formal report on the rights-based implications for neurotechnology to be delivered within 2 years. And let me conclude by saying it is essential that we all contribute to this process and processes like that, and like the NeuroTech Compass of GESDA, so that we can maximize our voice, join forces, and try to stay ahead of the curve of this rapidly developing, vastly consequential technology to maximize the benefits and also mitigate the risks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ayaka from New York. Yeah, so how are we actually going to do something concrete about that? How are we going to help the governments and the policymakers get somewhere? We let's imagine a center. We got a center for the Open Quantum Institute. Why can't we have a center for the NeuroTech Compass? So if we imagine a place where we can actually bring these communities, but not just policy, we need to bring the scientists, we need to bring the industry, we need to bring the communities of practice, et cetera, at the table to test this thing. And so the work we have ahead now is to bring your community to the table now, to the client, basically. We need to do this, a market study more thoroughly and test it out. What are we going to do in the next 6 months, tell me?
More dinners.
More dinners. Except your table doesn't have more than 15, so we need to, we need to do...
Don't laugh. I mean, it's not just about the food. It's dinner. Cocktails are like a cliche, but they're very traditional in terms of diplomatic instruments, but they can be very useful. But I completely agree with what some of you said, Meyraf also. We need to innovate diplomacy also, and make it more inclusive. There's also a lot of discussions going on right now here, everywhere, about the future of multilateralism, and I firmly believe in the future of multilateralism. But I think one of the pillars of its legitimacy must be inclusivity. And I think we need to make progress there, clearly. There are still a lot of governments that are very reluctant to have non-government stakeholders in discussions as like these. I had it in this process on ICT impact on conflict, and it's the same here, I agree. So we need to find a way again to make this easy for everybody, to understand the benefits of participating in these discussions and to trust again to what we bring to the table. We're not there yet. That's why we are only presenting a non-finished product or ideas where we want to go. But I think that's where we need to go collectively.
Yeah, and so our plan for 2023 and the coming months is really to continue this evaluation and this design, but also prototype. That's an important part of GESDA's translation phase. We're going to prototype and test these different ideas to do a prototype of the matrix so we can actually use it, test it. Then we actually also want to prototype how can we engage communities, whether they're students or patients, and bringing in industry, and probably just test it on a conference. Do an event where we can bring these different users to the table and be in real life, in situ situation to be able to test that. So stay tuned for more on that. Next year, hopefully before a year from now, but we'll see how that goes forward. But definitely we're in this final stretch on the evaluation and design to do the right thing. We wanted to give you the different voices, the complexity of making this happen. And that's actually, I think, what GESDA and Geneva, in this particular case, again, is quite privileged to be able to do. So on that note, thank you very much and bon appétit.
Thank you.